Well, hi there. I'm Mathew Blades. And for the last 27 years, I was a radio guy. And when you're on the radio, that's one of those jobs that comes with questions. People always want to know more. Stuff like, what time did you wake up? Who's the most famous person you ever met? What do you think of Howard Stern? So let's rip the list, because it's kind of fun. Not for me so much, but for you. 3:15 in the morning was the wake-up call for all those years. And the most famous, that's a hard one, right? Because there's these experiences where you're playing basketball with Imagine Dragons. Or you're in a mall and they're shutting it down because so many people have come to see Britney Spears. Or one of my favorites, just a few years ago, being at University of Phoenix Stadium and walking around the tour set with this woman, Andrea, and then having her take me into this beautiful Zen room to meet her daughter, Taylor Swift. Incredible moments. Now for the Howard Stern question, I'm going to answer that with this bit of audio right here.
Over the summer, I'm reading this article about a DJ named, I don't know the guy, I don't know where he works, I don't know what his act is, maybe he's a music guy. I don't know what he does on the radio, but Mathew Blades, a disc jockey who released a statement that he is going to a treatment center to get help. So right away, my eyes perked up. And
yeah, what does he need to be treated for?
He needed to be treated, I think he had anxiety or something. This guy, Mathew Blades, he said he got shingles and panic attacks.
On that day, that was a sign from the universe that everything was headed in the right direction. But everything he said was true. Shingles, panic attacks, number 1, number 2, number 3. And I got shingles on my face. And if you know anything about shingles, it only presents itself when you're really stressed out. But it was that third panic attack that really took me to a place of discovery. And I've got to tell you that when I'm sitting in this hospital bed and they're running all of these tests on me to figure out what's wrong, I know in my heart and in my head that there's work I've got to do. And they come to me and they tell me every test is absolutely fine. And so I know it's time to start owning the stories that are owning me and fully. I grew up anxious. I grew up in that depressed state sometimes. And the cool part about today's world is that I know I'm not alone. 1 in 3 people right now say they suffer from depression. Now let me be clear. I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. There are no letters after my name. I'm just somebody who lived it. So I crashed, right? July 12th, that was my day. That was the day that I went into the emergency room for that third and final panic attack that had lasted 10 hours. And again, when every test came back and said I was fine, I had no choice. It was time to start owning those stories that owned me. So I checked myself into a mental and spiritual health retreat for 4 days. I went to work on something I lovingly now call my trauma trilogy. But it was anything but for a long time. And the interesting thing is, when I walked into the front door of that retreat, Troy said to me, "You can't pour from an empty cup." And I never even considered for a moment that I had an empty cup. And then I considered it. Is my cup empty? And it was, completely. And that puts you in a place called survival. Now, while I was surviving, things around me suffered as a result. Not big disastrous things. Just stuff like showing up to my house angry all the time. Being short with my wife. Yelling big at my kids for little things. Pushing people to voicemail. And work? Come on. I've been doing that long enough, I'd switch that into autopilot and smile mode. which is not a real thing. It just sort of sums up how I operated. I lied to myself, to my kids, to my wife, to my coworkers, to everybody around me, to my radio audience, that I was absolutely good to go. And don't get me wrong, there were a lot of good days until there just weren't any more good days. So what happened? What was wrong? I'm struggling with both of these questions because I'm a father first and foremost. There's 2 kids at home watching me, and they're not getting the best version of me. My wife isn't getting the best version of me. And here's something I didn't care about then, but I care a lot about now. I wasn't treating myself like I deserved to be treated in those moments. And it all started with the lack of self-care. I was doing something different. They call it self-sabotage. And it's small things at first, but they add up. Doctors even have a name for it. They call it oxidative stress. It's the imbalance between free radicals and antioxidants in our body. And so the long and the short of that is, over time, that damage can lead to things like diabetes, cancer, your backache, your neck ache. More and more research is coming out that pretty much draws a straight line between the mind and the body with its connection to pain and disease. And now learning that for me was a game changer. Maybe for you too. You see, the body is sending you a signal. A signal so that you will do something about it. Not mask it, but deal with it. So let me take you inside that mental and spiritual retreat where I spent 4 days with therapists, with counselors, releases, lots of crying, so much crying. And I need to share 2 things with you because they fundamentally changed my operating system. As I mentioned earlier, I was there to dig into 3 events from earlier in my life. Acutely aware of my demons, just as I believe everybody else is. Early exposure to adult content as a child. A mom who used spanking and yelling as a primary means of discipline. I tell everybody, my parents were loving people. There was just the other side too. And so while I'm sitting with these therapists, she suggests to me that early exposure to the adult content probably found its way into relationships. She was right. She also suggested that kids who grow up in homes that there's some abuse taking place, 2 things happen. Number 1, they grow up feeling unsafe in their own home, whether they know it or not. And number 2, they grow up with a distorted view on what love is. And last but not least, I walked into that retreat to finally deal with my daddy issues. My father was he was a gentle, kind, fun-loving alcoholic. A functioning alcoholic, as I've come to learn over the years. But back in 1996, my family is getting ready to meet the woman that I'm then engaged to. And it's a 4:30 barbecue on the deck that my dad and I built together. And I'm on the other side of the house over here. I'm getting our horseshoe pits ready. It's a family tradition that we had. And all of a sudden, Julie comes screaming around the corner. She's saying, your dad, something's wrong with your dad. So I drop my horseshoes and I come running around the corner. And what I see is my dad standing up, his face is beet red, and my mom is slapping him across the face as if to say, snap out of this. But he is not snapping out of this. He slumps in his chair. My brother calls 911. I lift my father up. I lay him on the deck. Like I said earlier, I'm not an expert. But I paid attention to a couple of life-saving techniques, and so I try them. I look to see if he's choking. That's not happening. I start doing my best version of CPR. And nothing is working, and I can't save my dad. Now, in that moment, there's a set of beliefs that's being set up in my head. You don't know enough. You can't save your father. You're letting everybody down. Just then a nurse comes from up the street to take over for me. 90 minutes later, we're in the hospital where my dad is hooked up to life support. A week later, we bury my dad at Fort Snelling Cemetery. It's a beautiful military funeral where I have the honor of delivering his eulogy. Here's the lesson. Because of the weight and the beliefs that I had tied up into those three events in my life, I made so many decisions based in fear. I was living my life like a child. And you hear people say this all the time about adults. He's acting like a child. She's acting like a child. You are. Experts, they call it your inner child. And if you don't go to work on your inner child continues to work you.